From the Gulf States Newsroom, this is the Gulf States Gumbo, your weekly serving of stories from Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I'm community engagement producer Nellie Beckett, chopping it up this week with Burgin Mathews of The Lost Child.
From the Southern Music Research Center in Birmingham, Alabama, you are tuned to The Lost Child. My name is Burgin Mathews, and on our program this summer, we are bringing you exclusive.
You're listening to the Gulf States Gumbo. I'm Nellie Beckett, and that was a small sample from The Lost Child, a weekly show that's described as down-home roots music radio. We're featuring Burgin this week since his show is enjoying an expanded distribution across the Gulf South, including on KRVS out of Lafayette, Louisiana. To talk more about it, I'm joined now by the show's creator, Burgin Mathews, who produces the weekly show and runs the Southern Music Research Center here in Birmingham. Hi, Burgin.
Hi, Nellie.
So how are you today?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Great. So let's start at the beginning. Can you kind of walk me through how your passion for preserving Southern music history started?
Oh, man. Well, that, I guess, goes way back. I've been into all kinds of music for, mostly my whole life. I guess a significant turning point was in 10th grade. I got a cassette tape of Woody Guthrie, and that kind of changed. That opened up a whole new world of music that I had never encountered, and led me to wanting more kind of historic and roots type music. Led me to the Folkways Records catalog, whose mission had been to document the sounds of the world and all sorts of kind of archival and field recording releases from that record label. And so, since about the age of 16, I was kind of deeply passionate about all sorts of music, especially music from where I was from. So when I discovered, field recordings from the state of Alabama, I grew up in Montgomery, and I, gravitated towards music that had a history that dovetailed in some ways with at least the place where I was from.
That's very cool. So tell me, how did the Lost Child show come about out of that?
Well, I, in college as an undergrad and then in graduate school, I spent a lot of time on college radio stations. So I also fell in love with radio and, playing the sorts of music that I loved on the radio. So, when I left grad school and was hoping to find a way to stay on the radio, I'd moved to Birmingham, Alabama, and there was not too long after that a new originally internet-only radio station, Birmingham Mountain Radio, independent radio station, was starting up. And so I sent them a pitch to kind of a grassroots kind of music radio show, wide-ranging mix, from, old-time string bands to rhythm and blues to classic country, gospel music, Muscle Shoals soul, sort of just all the sorts of stuff that I like. And got on the air originally on the internet with Birmingham Mountain Radio. Then they became a real, grown-up terrestrial radio station, and I've been on there ever since. I'm still there, but got picked up along the way by public radio station, WBHM, and through WBHM, got it to some other ears and in places as well.
Very cool. So from, as a young man, Smithsonian Folkways resonated, then grad school, then your radio practice has evolved. How has your historical practice kind of evolved alongside that journey?
Oh, well, I always first and foremost wanted to be a writer. And since I loved music, I found myself gravitating more and more to writing about music and nonfiction, true stories about the people who make it. And I started doing a lot of oral history work. When I graduated from college, I got a tape recorder and microphone. That was my graduation present. And by request, my parents asked me, is there something that you would like? And what I wanted was a microphone and tape recorder so that I could record people's stories. And I started doing that the summer after I graduated from college, and kind of found myself doing a lot of oral history work. And it's just kind of one thing. That was sort of, I was an English teacher, high school English teacher for a lot of years. So this was all just sort of along the side of all of that. I met in probably 2008 or so a local jazz musician here in Birmingham, Dr. Frank Adams, known locally as Doc Adams, who was a just phenomenal musician and educator. He had played with Duke Ellington back in the day and with Sun Ra before that, back in the 1940s, and was just a wonderful storyteller. And what was supposed to be one interview with Doc Adams for maybe a magazine article or something turned into a year and a half of weekly recorded interviews that we did, and that became a book about his life taken directly from those tapes, first-person story of Doc Adams and of the Birmingham jazz scene. And so just one thing kind of continued to lead to another in terms of documenting music and music that comes from a place. So the book with Doc turned into a second book about Birmingham's jazz history, and Southern Music Research Center, the nonprofit, kind of evolved eventually out of all of that.
Incredible. So you mentioned the interviews you've done. What kind of ephemera besides sound recordings do you archive and preserve?
Well, so the Southern Music Research Center is a nonprofit whose real center is the archive. It's an online archive of, like you say, sound recordings, but also visual items, ephemera, a lot of photographs. We're really interested in sort of photographs of music in everyday life. So not necessarily items documenting the sort of legendary, iconic recording artists that everyone already knows, but, photos of families gathered around the piano, or local marching bands, or community choirs, or bar bands, anything like that. We really look for material, whether it's audio or whether it's a photograph or whether it's a funeral program or something like that, that documents the lived musical experiences of everyday people, which is all of us. I mentioned funeral programs, and that's, to me, one of our most meaningful collections, for example, is our In Memoriam collection, and it's funeral programs of singers and musicians from around the South. And there are a few very well-known artists represented in some of those programs, but we've also worked with families and organizations to document the lives of the unsung. So, local choir directors, or, people whose impact was in their local community and they helped shape the music of the place where they were from, maybe weren't well known beyond that place. But those are very much the stories we're interested in documenting and celebrating.
So tell me, who gives their archives to the Southern Music Research Center?
Well, anybody can. I mean, part of a lot of what we do is digitization services and preservation services, working with individuals, with families, with organizations who have music artifacts. So it might be a person with just, one photograph of that grandmother who directed the church choir for 50 years. We can, digitize that so that the family gets to keep their photo. But then there is a public record for it as well. We can also work with families and organizations, individuals, to find an institutional archival home. If they're looking for a place to preserve the physical originals, we can do that. But we work with everybody. In building our archive, one of the first places I started was just creating a public space for a lot of the material that I'd personally collected on Birmingham's jazz history in the 12 plus years that I was working on the Birmingham Jazz Book. And I wanted to create a space that could not only archive and make publicly accessible that research material, but also do the same for other, writers or documentary filmmakers or folklorists or record producers or anybody who's engaged in that kind of cultural documentation. They might publish a kind of finished product, but there's a lot of research material that goes into it. And so we also have an open invitation for, for those sorts of documentarians and creators who are looking for a space to preserve the kind of the deleted scenes and the extras and all the research that goes into those final products. But it is importantly, maybe first and foremost, for just the regular, families and people who have a personal story to tell or a family legacy to celebrate.
Definitely. What are some of the biggest surprises you've found in this work?
I guess I've been surprised by, this is still a very young nonprofit. As I said, the Lost Child radio show has been around for quite a while, but the nonprofit has only been around for about 5 years. And very quickly, people started coming to us, as well as some organizations. One of our first major collection came from the North Carolina Folklife Institute, which had this massive body of material from Western North Carolina that they had done a lot of work in digitizing and preserving, but needed kind of a public platform for making the material accessible. So then, families coming to us because, for example, maybe old acetate disc recording. We've got several recordings of local Birmingham kind of country musicians from the 1940s and 50s. And some of these are people you won't find on the internet. You think everything is on the internet until you look for some of these unheralded figures. So we hear from families sometimes who have discovered their grandfather or somebody like that in our site, and they're thrilled to find that documentation, and sometimes come to us and say, we also have, a scrapbook of his, newspaper clippings or whatever it is. So I guess the wonderful surprise and the most gratifying thing about this work has been hearing from people to whom this all means something, and having people come to us and say, oh, I've got, in my closet, a bunch of reel-to-reel tapes that my dad was in a country band in Pinson, Alabama in the 1960s. Could you do something with these? So there's just so much musical life out there and history out there, and I guess the surprise and pleasure and thrill has been how quickly people have found us and started bringing some of that to us.
That is so awesome. How has producing a radio show taught you more about the music you preserve?
Well, I guess it has, because every week I have to think deliberately about the music that I'm listening to anyway. I don't know if the radio show really makes me learn more. The radio show is a chance to share the music that I love more than anything. But if I'm, trying to, some weeks have a theme, not every week does, but if I'm trying to fill an hour with the theme about, I don't know, a particular subject, then I can go down some rabbit holes that I might not have been before in search of something that might kind of fit the theme, or I might need to learn a little bit about the biography of a musician whose music I've enjoyed for a long time, but whose personal details I've gotten a little rusty on. So it does keep me continually engaged with the music that I care about.
And, here at the Gulf States Newsroom, we're all about Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And kind of a question for you, Burgin, how does the music of Alabama differ from Mississippi and Louisiana, and what traditions or musical traditions bind our Gulf South region together?
Oh, wow. What a question.
No pressure.
Well, I don't know how much time we have, but in terms of, first of all, music doesn't adhere to political boundaries, like the boundaries of a state or even of a region. So I try to keep even the definition of Southern pretty loose in Southern Music Research Center. But I do know that Alabama has a lot of traditions that are really rich and are often overlooked. I think sometimes Alabama gets overlooked because, Mississippi gets a lot of credit for the blues. There's, you've got these big music cities, Nashville and Memphis and New Orleans, sort of around but not in Alabama. And so sometimes we forget about the rich contributions of this state, which include just deep veins of sacred harp singing, for example, and shape note singing of various kinds. Southern gospel up in Sand Mountain is strong. African-American gospel quartets here in the city of Birmingham. The quartet sound of the United States of America was shaped in a lot of ways by the Jefferson County sound, and that is pretty unique in a lot of ways, as is the history of Birmingham's jazz music. And, of course, at Muscle Shoals, there's a really rich tradition there. So there's a lot that is unique to Alabama, or that finds kind of a unique expression in Alabama. But most of those traditions that I just named, whether it's gospel or blues or, kind of traditional country music, those, you can find those veins take another kind of shape in Mississippi and Louisiana and across the South. So Yeah, and the lines get fuzzy because people move around and expression, even, before radio and recordings, people moved around. So that stuff is all a big, this is the Gulf States gumbo. So, it is all a big gumbo.
So, Burgin,
yes.
Before you go, we have a feature called Gulf States Gems at the end of the show to highlight people, places, and things we love across the region. And in the past, you actually submitted a Gulf States Gem to our Instagram. Can you tell us a little bit more about the regional gem that you highlighted?
Yeah, there is a jazz jam session in Birmingham, sort of in the Crestwood, Woodlawn area at Williams Chapel CME Church. And it's a jam session Sunday afternoons led by Bo Berry, who's just a phenomenal local musician. He's been around this town for a long time. He's kind of our jazz elder. He's a lot of musicians have come up under him. Some listeners in Birmingham might know the jam session that takes place at True Story Brewing Company on Tuesday nights. Phenomenal event led by Jose Carr. But lesser known, more under the radar, is this Sunday afternoon session at Williams Chapel. And it is... It's a quiet, kind of meditative, contemplative Sunday afternoon. It's not religious, but it's in a church, so it almost has this kind of spiritual quality to it. It's organized by a saxophonist named Ronald Goodwin and Bo Berry, who, like I say, is kind of one of our local jazz heroes. So a great place that a lot of people don't know about, but highly recommended for a Sunday afternoon here in Birmingham.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jem Burgin, and thank you so much for being here on the Gumbo today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
This week's show is cooked up by the Gulf States Newsroom team. Our theme music is by DJ Supreme. Special thanks to our partner stations, WBHM, Mississippi Public Broadcasting, WWNO, and WRKF. You can find us in your podcast feeds every Friday. Look us up and be sure to subscribe. Again, I'm your host, Nellie Beckett. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to stir your roux.